Welcome to God with George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 29. We're recording it on Tuesday, December 1st at 2:33 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to follow up with what we were discussing last episode. We're basically trying to better understand God, to just really focus on what God's all about. And we were exploring this idea, the question of why did God create pain? And from that, we went to the question, well, why did God create evil? And we're kind of noticing they're very connected, the concepts. So we're going to continue to explore that. And that might take up, a good part of this entire episode. We'll see how it goes. But again, we're trying to understand God more and more clearly. Joshua, how you doing?
Doing good. Glad to be here, George. Yeah, this issue. Why does God allow pain and also evil that causes pain, right? And so we could talk about what we might call natural pain, disease, right? Suffering or whatever it is, and then human inflicted pain. Whether it be somebody attacked you physically or emotionally or spiritually or even politics that cause you to suffer in some way, right? And I think if we really look at it and take it back in history through the evolution of consciousness, we see that this has been one of the most fundamental issues, right, of trying to understand God and creating a religion around that understanding to try to create better behavior, essentially just better practices, better ways of being that can create a better community that, that survives better and thrives better and creates less pain and suffering.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important distinction you raise between God created pain and evil and human created pain and evil. I mean, on the one hand, we can see that since we don't have a free will, since everything is God's will, it really is, in a certain sense, all God created. But the utility of understanding, of making this distinction, is that, well, actually, it's interesting because, I was going to say that, I mean, we certainly have it. We, for example, there's a hurricane or lightning or something, some kind of natural disaster. There's not much we can do about that. That's after the fact. Maybe we're being punished for something. I don't know. But when it comes to human pain and evil, then that's something that we have to see ourselves not as free agents, but as agents to be able to. But again, I want to return. Why do you think God created this stuff? I mean, you're God. You can do anything. Why would you create pain and evil?
Yeah, George. I mean, that's a really hard question. I think, so much of it comes from, the laws that God set in motion or that allowed God to create life, you might say, the laws of physics and chemistry, but more so biology, right? And, we look at in the wild with wild animals, and, for most of them, not for many of them, they rely on a diet of eating other animals. So if we can imagine very closely to that, times of scarce competition for food, early in human history, your survival may not have been carnivorous of eating other humans. You probably were eating other animals, but you were having to inflict pain on other humans if if it allowed you to protect your food source or your food territory.
All right, I understand that. But again, we have to remind ourselves, presumably, God could have created our biology any way God wanted to. So in other words, God could have had, for example, all animals eat plants and have plants feel no pain at all, you know. Um, but so yeah, so it's kind of and another thing that just came to mind is that again, this universe, it's 13.8 billion years, and pain is only 300 million years old. Before 300 million years there was no pain, and without pain you really can't have evil, because evil is what presumably creates pain. So this is this pain and evil stuff is a very small blip in God's creation.
Yeah, I guess you have to consider, evolution is amoral, and it's also really doesn't care about pain in the way that, these emotions, whether it's happiness or pain or suffering, you know, are there to get us to respond to things in a way that hopefully is for our best, case outcome, right? And so it's, I think this question, we tend to anthropomorphize God again, of saying, why does God create pain? And think of God in terms of, a ruler or a dictator that is a human being that can make choices or decisions that have effect on the outcome of all of us, when maybe that's the old way of thinking of God, and that's all that previous religions could do, but now we have a much broader understanding and perspective of God.
I, Josh, I have to disagree because basically evolution, we understand it as, mutations and natural selection. And some biologists mistakenly believe that Darwin, had this idea of random mutation, which he never talked about randomness really. He just talked about mutations. But like, evolution is completely God directed. Again, like if we go back to our basic definition of God, as everything, God must be all powerful. These biological processes, evolution, everything is. And again, like if there is an intelligence, if we're intelligent, if we're conscious, it's not our consciousness, our intelligence. It has to be that of God. So I think we can't let God off the hook. We can't, see God as just amoral or just the natural process.
Well, yeah, I'm all for not letting God off the hook. So, um, yeah, I mean, it is what it is, and we may never know. We could probably argue about it till the end of time, and I think all we can do now is try to figure out, well, this is what we got to work with. What version of God allows there to be the least amount of pain and suffering? What kind of God or version of God, understanding of God, makes God a problem solver that solves the problems that create pain, right? And again, I think, this was the noble goal of all religions, and they all kind of had this universal golden rule, right, of do unto others as you wish to be done unto you, and hopefully that would solve a lot of fight and tensions and suffering. But I think we can take it to a whole nother level now that we understand the illusion of free will, and we understand consciousness much better, and causality and systems thinking. I think we can create a more advanced, evolved understanding of God.
Yeah, and again, it's very important to. I mean, I don't know what the percentage is in terms of a fraction, but you know, 300 million years within a 13.8 billion year universe is a very small, tiny fraction of time. And again, this is just like this. I mean, well, I mean, we have to actually speculate that in other worlds there may be pain and evil also. Yes, and we have to kind of like perhaps speculate that even though we can't understand why that pain and evil are necessary. But no, having just said that, I'm reminding myself that no, for 13.8 billion years minus 300 million years, there was no pain and evil. So that's, that's something that's encouraging. So like, it seems like mostly there isn't pain and evil.
Yeah, I mean, I think one tool that we have in our comparative religions toolbox is seeing how different religions, deal with pain. And I think this is where the Buddhists, for example, have a more uh, they kind of integrated a wisdom that uh, that you find in many cultures, but um, in a more stoic perspective of being able to tolerate pain and kind of detach from it, if it's inevitable in your life for whatever reason at that time. And I mean, one thing I'm reminded of that all religions seem to do is provide a community network of somewhat emotional support, right? And so, I mean, if you're suffering through disease or famine or whatever it is, and you have a network of friends, a community, that suffering is much less intense, right? And it's a technology, really.
Right. And so like, yeah, I mean, I think we have to like, the purpose of religion. God created religion. God created Buddhism and Judaism, Christianity. And so yes, the purpose of these religions, God wants us, even though God put pain and evil in this world, God wants us to be in pleasure and to not feel pain. For example, like in Judaism, there's this advice that's given that to suffer with joy, and that's similar to, I guess, what the Buddha said, the like, see the suffering as something outside of yourself. Don't identify with it, perhaps. So that's important. It's important to note that yes, even though there is pain and evil in the world, God wants us. It seems to be God's will that we not experience pain and evil.
Yeah, George. That's something I struggle to do, but I know it's possible. Interesting connection there, because we talk about a lot about the illusion of free will, and it's very similar in that when we do something, there's two signals essentially in our brain. One is this, you could say this is an oversimplification, but it's the signal of wanting to do it and acting it out. And then there's another signal of giving us this feeling that we chose of our own free will to do that thing. And it's very similar in Buddhism with this idea of pain. So we might be experiencing something and feel the pain sensations, right? But there's a separate signal in our brain that's binding to that one, that's getting us to interpret it as very painful and suffering. And, through meditation and different things that people talk about, experiences people have, with all these signals that are bound together, you can unbind them to transform consciousness, essentially.
Right. And so that, to pull this back to God, so the question is, why does God deceive us in this way? So in other words, like God is, deceiving us into thinking we have a free will. God is deceiving us into believing that the pain we feel, the suffering we feel is inevitable. And interestingly, God is at this point in history, through us and many of us, just correcting this illusion, causing us to perceive that we don't have a free will. And like with the Buddha and the current science you're referring to, now God wants us to like transcend this suffering that really isn't necessary. So I mean, that's an interesting reality about God, that God makes a reality that he nonetheless wants us to, first get wrong, then get right, and then hopefully, benefit from that.
Yes, certainly. I think God has a sense of humor, it seems. Um, yeah, I think the reason that these issues are tied so much together is because so much pain and suffering comes from this belief in free will, right? And essentially, so much evil, even because this pain and suffering is tied with this issue of what is evil and how do we prevent evil. And this has always been one of the major questions of religion, understanding God. And at the root of this is largely free will, because this free will issue, right? Because when you understand that will is causal and you start to understand the causal processes that create will, then you can understand how to transform will and outcome. And that's essentially all we could do. Just like we can't, stop all suffering, we can, stop some suffering, and doing that through uh, changing the will.
All right, so let's shift from exploring pain and evil so much to like exploring. So like God governs everything. God, every thought you're having right now, every thought we're having, we're expressing, it's all God's consciousness. So then the first question becomes, why would God, just basically make beings like us to believe that we have a free will, that we have believed that we have a will free of God's will and free of our biology and all these things that really compel our reaction? That's an interesting kind of, and again, you got to back to history. I mean, the belief in free will is probably only a few thousand years old. So that's just a fraction of a blink blip in history, but we want to explore why would God do that? And there may not be an answer, but again, in order to understand God, I think we need to ask these questions.
Yeah, because so much of our belief in free will, like you said, it's very recent that we believe that, and very curiously that it's recent amount of time that equals the current mainstream religions, right? And so these religions seem to have given us this idea, this false belief in free will, and causality that you know that haven't served us, right? Certainly aren't serving us now. You've got millions of people addicted to drugs or depressed or, you know, having no ambition or hope in life. So they're just wasting their life away. And, they could be out trying to build a business or even volunteer and help others, but they just don't have any motivation, and I find myself in this position a lot more than I'd like to do. And so I think that's part of what we're solving with this show.
Well, absolutely. And a lot of it is that, with the free will belief, we blame ourselves. I'm just not good enough. I'm not doing enough right. I'm making too many mistakes. And when we do that, we punish ourselves. We kind of like limit ourselves to the extent we can understand that, wait a minute, the reason I succeed is God. The reason I fail is God. That puts everything in a totally different perspective. And it gives us the freedom. It's like, this free will is a burden. It's a heavy burden to carry that, like, everything we do is up to us, and when we screw up, it's like because we're bad or evil. So absolutely, it makes a lot of sense to overcome that, to understand God correctly, in order to be able to forgive ourselves. It's not even like we have to forgive ourselves, because like if we don't have a free will, there's nothing to forgive. But it is a very important understanding of God to help us evolve, as a human species.
Yeah, George, it just blows my mind, why more people wouldn't want to come into this understanding that free will is an illusion, right? And I've started to understand, I've looked at how I got here, and, a lot of people feel like they want to believe they have free will. They want to feel like that. And what's really going on, it seems, is that's not what's really going on, because when you realize you don't have a free will, then you can start to look at the science of will. Basically, you have a whole palette of options, right? It's like a whole menu of choices you can choose from when you learn how the will works to affect the outcome that you wouldn't seek out and understand if you just thought you had free will and it just end up doing the same thing over and over again. What's really going on is people are trying to avoid the pain they've felt from being blamed that they made mistakes or did the wrong thing, right? And this has come from, again, lots of religions that didn't understand these concepts.
Yeah, as you were talking, and a thought just came to me. Um, Lucifer in the Bible, he's an angel, and he envies God's power, and he wants to be like God, and he rebels and all. And that actually may explain part of why we want to believe we have a free will. Because, like, to the extent we understand we don't have a free will, we're like puppets, robots, mannequins. Whereas, like, to the extent we believe we had a free will, we're like God. It's like this belief in free will is idolatrous. It's blasphemous. It's attributing to ourselves a power that's reserved with God. So I think, yes, I think we can see the belief in free will as an attempt, and actually, in a certain sense, it's an attempt to emulate God, to be like God. But again, it's like an attempt that doesn't recognize that God is in the and again, there's a word blasphemy for attributing to ourselves that which belongs to God. So it really is a sin to believe in free will.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, and there's kind of a righteous, step to that, because I don't agree with this idea that we're mannequins and robots. You know, like we are that as long as we believe in free will, because there's somebody else pulling our strings, and there may always be, but at least we can see the strings once we realize, the illusion of free will, and we can choose which strings pull us much more effectively, right? And we can learn how to work with it, and we can spend some time trying to do one thing and realize that's not meant for me and go try something else, instead of blaming ourselves that it didn't work out, or it becomes a much more graceful process, right? And so it's really it is a spiritual discipline in this aspect that it's trying to learn as much about God, as much about causality as possible.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned. So like, yeah, I refer to us as robots and puppets and mannequins. Um, I don't know why I do that. If I had a free will, I probably wouldn't, because like you're right. I think a much more acceptable way to describe this to people is like we're like the hands of God. If my hand writes something, writes a story or something, you know, it's not responsible for it. My brain is. If my hand had a consciousness, it's saying, "Oh yeah, I'm writing this." It says, "No, you're not writing this." My brain is telling exactly what to write. So I think that's probably again a much better way that we are manifesting God's will. We are the hands of God, and perhaps perhaps the messaging is really important. If we want people to understand the true nature of God, we've got to come up with ways that people can accept, that people can agree with in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, George, I think the problem I have with it is that we don't go far enough with the illustration, really. I mean, all of us actually want to be puppets when you think about it, because we all have this, you know, idea. It's another illusion of the personal self, and we want to feel like we have a self, just like we have free will. And this is scientifically totally, bunk, but we are essentially puppets. But to take it further, so often, so many people, you see this on a lot of book covers and a lot of talks about the illusions of free will, that we're just puppets and not in control. But to take it a step further and to realize that is true, and it's a good thing, because we can learn how to be a puppeteer of ourself, right? And just like if you had a car or a phone or anything, you'd want it to be reliable and consistent, and you'd want to learn how to work it and to use it to its fullest potential. It's the same thing we can do when we understand these illusions.
Yeah, and you raise a very complicated point, because for example, there's willpower. Willpower is like, if we set out a goal that we want to achieve, we want to have the perseverance, the focus. We want to be able to achieve our goals. I've been trying to, make some croutons, for my salads for months. It just hasn't happened, you know. And so like, it's good to have this sense of will that we can get ourselves to do what we want to do. But then on the other hand, it's also good, like, rather than seeing ourselves as these tiny, insignificant, beings who might have a free will, but we're so, insignificant in a certain sense. Rather than that, to see ourselves where we're not just as independent people, we are God. We are God in every sense of the word, except the sense of control. And that's probably a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's, just it's interesting, this aspect of comparative religions, that essentially, a lot of people are becoming atheist or changing religions because of the internet and this flood of information, right? And being able to see news stories and connect with people all around the world and kind of see the false dogmas actually more real, right? But the same flood of information, is actually a potential for a new version of God and a new version of essentially what the will is, where we no longer have to believe in free will. We no longer have, the only tool we have is used to be just to be able to shame or blame people. At least that's what religions thought. And largely it was because they didn't have an understanding of modern medicine and psychology and sociology and all of the techniques and tools of all of the religions all over the world. But now we have access to that.
All right, and that's a great point, because in today's modern world, at least in the Western world, especially in Europe, people are driven, leaving religion in droves. I mean, like a great percentage of Europe is atheist. Here in the United States, congregations, Jewish, Christian, they're losing people, decade by decade. And I think it's because people go to religion to understand God and the nature of reality, to understand, I can use God and reality synonymously here, actually. So like, to the extent that religions are still touting this belief that people want to believe in, but it's just not true. Maybe deep down they understand that it's not true, even though they want it to be true. So like to the extent we can evolve beyond that, help people evolve beyond that, then maybe we can create religions that more accurately describe God.
Yeah, I mean and it's so crucial because so it's really sticky. The free will issue and the behavior change issue is incredibly sticky. Our current understanding is that most of our problematic behavior is was formed in childhood, early on in life, and it sticks with us, right? um, and you know to change these behaviors, whether it be a propensity for addiction or depression, or even something in an opportunity, if you want to start a business, become an entrepreneur, or go back to school or change your career, whatever it is, all of these things have to have a very strong community support to be effective and competitive, right? Because we're social creatures, and that's how we evolve. We evolved, by relying on each other to be at our best, right? And so I think religion needs to re-embrace that.
And I think an important part of community that religion, serves, also creates, is like, for example, you and I understand that free will is an illusion, that God's will is the only will. But if we're immersed in a society, in a global culture that doesn't believe that, and that global culture through the media, through everything, just presenting this skewed, mistaken view of reality, it's going to like make it much, much harder for us to really not just understand that we don't have free will, that God's will is everything, but to integrate that understanding. And so to the extent, when religions wake up and finally get this right, it's going to be so much easier for each of us as individuals to more accurately see the true nature of God, the true nature of our reality. Josh, we got a minute? Finish it up. Yep.
Yeah, George. I mean, this is where, I kind of realized, looking at all of the religions and all of the views of God, that I kind of had to forge my own path. And I encourage everybody to do this because this is on the back of everybody's mind. Everybody's looking at this and seeing this, and they're trying to make this choice. Well, do I stick with my religion, or do I go find another one, or I leave religion altogether? And for one, you can be a beacon of light in your current religion by understanding these issues as issues of free will, and these other illusions, right? And you can basically, we're living through a renaissance, so we need a lot of people to step up and have new ideas, and contribute to new ideas, because the evolution of consciousness has always been driven by novelty, new ideas, right? And we're at a time of desperately needing new ideas, and people to be empowered, and to reinvent this understanding of God and these ways to worship God. And we look forward to talking more about this, and we'll see you tomorrow.